Thank you. I'm Scott Smith. You can contact me at scott@dscottsmith.com and Twitter at @d_Scott. I want to mention my joint venture, which is One Unified Strategy in our current course, Out of the Box Business Plan, and Preparing Your Business for Financing at oneunifiedstrategy.com. Also, Women Up Global, focusing on female entrepreneurs now enrolling for their biz school at womenupglobal.com. In 1964, there was a movie release called The Seven Faces of Dr. Lao. It was a campy movie where a traveling circus comes to an Old West town. And in the story, there's a series of vignettes where the townspeople interact with different members of the circus. And as I mentioned, the film was kind of campy and certainly formulaic. Each person that's interacting with the circus, they all have their problems solved in a very short period of time. However, there was one very poignant vignette where there was one lady. She was very full of herself, always feeling quite important and always at the expense of everyone else. She dreamed of wealth, status, and power over others. And even though she had none of these, she treated others poorly. So she decided to pay her 5 cents and have her fortune read by Apollonius of Tyana. Full of expectations, she sits with the mysterious man, and she's anticipating a mirror of her own frivolousness here at the circus. And she asks, "When will I strike oil on my land?" "Never," is the simple response. "But I paid a lot of money for that land." "You wasted your money." So she pauses. "Well, what I really want to know is, when shall I be married again?" Well, you see, it is the curse of Apollonius to tell the truth. And she's told that contrary to what she leads others to believe, her first husband is not dead. He simply walked out of her life. And he goes on to say that tomorrow will be like today, and the day after tomorrow will be like the day before yesterday. And your remaining days will be a tedious collection of hours full of useless vanities. You will think no new thoughts, and you will forget what little you have known. Older you will become, but not wiser. Stiffer, but not more dignified. And when you die, you will be buried and forgotten. And for all the good or evil, creation or destruction your living might have accomplished, you might just as well have never lived at all. See, our greatest fear is not pain or loss, it is irrelevance. And we instinctively understand that this person, this lady, is living an empty life. She is alone and irrelevant. So sad. And yet we all know people like this. They have the same fortune. You will live and you will die, and the world will be no different for your having been here. Existence is not enough. So there was a prison with a cell that faced a prison yard, and in that yard there was a large pile of gravel. Each day, the inmate would be shovel by shovel and wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow move that pile from one end of the yard to the other. And that prisoner's punishment wasn't the back-breaking physical labor. His punishment took place when he was in the cell. And he would look out that window into the prison yard and see the pile of gravel and realize that all of his energy, effort, sweat, all of his work was meaningless. See, it's not hard work that we're afraid of. So complete this phrase with me, right? If it was easy, everyone would do it. Great. Okay, let's take that as a hypothesis. So one of my endeavors was a startup game company called Pajago. And we had several different physical board games, and one of the things I did was to create different ways to play. I invented games. So I have here a new game. So what I've got 10 balls in this bag, and the goal is to get the balls, the 10 balls, each one of them, into this little basket right here. So if I brought a volunteer up and we had him do this, and I put the basket right next to him, they just take the ball out from the bag, put it in here, just like this, 10 times. All right. It's not very engaging. So let's change the game up. Let's take this little basket. Let's not put it right next to him, but let's move it out into the audience. Let's have someone hold that basket. Now we take the 10 balls and say, all right, let's have you toss those balls into that basket. And the person tosses the balls and they get some in. Each one they get a little bit closer. They kind of know what angle to throw, how hard to do it, how they bounce, and gets the balls in there, some number in there. And if I ask the person if they would want to be able to do that game again, well, they wouldn't do the one where the basket's sitting next to them. There's no challenge. See, we need challenge to survive and thrive, right? And so when the basket is out here, there's a challenge to kind of arc that ball. And if I said, well, do you think you could do better next time? You got 7 out of 10, 5 out of 10, whatever it is. They want to try to get to 10 out of 10. That is their ultimate goal. And that is much more engaging. So we had a hypothesis. We said that if it was easy, everyone would do it. We set up an experiment, a game, and we ran it. And what we learned was that if it was easy, nobody would do it. You see, we need challenge to survive and thrive. And without it, we wither and die. And this is the way you're created, from the day you were born. See, when a child is born through cesarean section, the doctors don't just open the mother up and haul the kid out. They make a small incision. And they require that child to force its way into the world, similar to what he'd faced through the birth canal. The challenges and the pressures, they kick on certain systems, and it purges the lungs of fluid and prevents that child from a condition called wet lung. And without that struggle, that child could become ill. See, we need challenge to survive and thrive, and without it, we wither and we die. So what if we could examine the head of our volunteer that ran this game? You know, what would the brain show us? See, now science provides us an empirical witness to what we understand. Tools like the EEG, the electroencephalogram, and the fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, allow us to look inside the human brain and examine the physiology under a variety of conditions. So if we were able to put our volunteer's brain inside an MRI, we could see that certain areas of the brain were activated when he was successful at tossing the ball into the basket. And chemicals, hormones were released like dopamine, which gives us a surge of pleasure when we achieve our goals. And here's something interesting. You see, if we look at the brain, the same activity happens when our gamester here came close. That is, when they were nearly successful. See, the same areas of the brain activated. So success is invigorating, but it seems so is near success. We want to keep going. We want to continue to experience that rush. So these tools, the EEG, fMRI, and so forth, add to the understanding of humans. And this is a tremendous advancement. You see, in the first half of the last century, the emphasis was on behaviorism. That is, behavior is a simple series of inputs and outputs, of stimuli and response, resulting in conditioning. And you might remember Pavlov and his drooling dogs. The dominant thought was that external forces controlled behavior and free will did not exist. The brain was simply a black box. In college, I took a class called Experimental Psychology, affectionately known as Rat Lab. And we had our test subject, a cute little white rat. We called him Sylvester. We attempted to change his behavior through conditioning. We'd change the inputs, the stimuli, and then document his response. And we were moderately successful in changing his behavior by associating an outcome with a stimulus. Now, behaviorism was developed by scientist John Watson in 1913. He was expanding on Pavlov's conditioning. He conducted a famous experiment where he had a baby touch a rat, and all was fine, and the child was not afraid. And then, each time the child touched the rat, Watson banged a hammer on the table, and the baby became terrified and associated the fear to the rat, and in fact to all furry creatures, associating an outcome with a stimulus. See, this might be fine for lab rats. The problem was when we take behaviorism out of the lab and into building relationships. When we attempt to apply behaviorism to relationships, it's an isolated tool. It's not conditioning. What we experience is best described as manipulation. Perhaps you've seen this in advertising or sales training. This work was continued by B.F. Skinner, who denied that the mind or feelings have any impact. You see, behaviorism not only wanted to understand human behavior, but to predict and control it. See, maybe we'd like a simple equation when we're dealing with others, but none of us can be reduced to a series of stimuli and responses. Occasionally throw some cheese into our cubicles and we'll just keep performing. No, we are complex creatures, and our brain behaves like no other. What other beast would look for a challenge? We demonstrated this in our game experiment. What else do we know by looking at the brain? Well, you were not designed to be alone. We're social creatures. Studies using such tools and methodology confirm our brains are wired for connection and social interaction. Now, much of the early studies focused on romantic relationships, but more recently, we've looked at friendship. Now, Robert Louis Stevenson said, "A friend is a gift you give yourself." But perhaps more prescient was Aristotle when asked to describe what is a friend. And he said, "A single soul dwelling in two bodies." And here's what we know about relationships. If you have good social connections, you have better health. You live longer. You might think that the obvious answer is the practical support offered. Someone's sick and you share food with them. You bring them meals, or you share the workload. We call this enacted support. But it turns out that perceived support is actually more important. Perceived support is simply knowing that your friends and family will be there for you. Clinical psychologist Jim Cohn conducted a study where he placed individuals into an MRI, and he was looking at what was going on inside their brain under certain conditions. Now, what happened was, this all started because one of his patients that he was working with, who was suffering from PTSD due to a war-related involvement, was unwilling to share, to talk about his experience until his wife was there actually holding his hand. And so this experiment was actually set up to measure the effects of hand holding. But what they did is actually they looked at hand holding with a loved one, also with a stranger, and then having just your loved one physically there, not holding your hand, and also with a stranger. And then also they looked at the subject with nobody there. So what they did is they showed this subject a series of images, and when a blue O came up, nothing happened. But when the person saw a red X, there was a 20% chance that they would receive a mild electric shock on their ankle. And so when that person saw the red X and they were by themselves, their brain would light up. All the anticipation of this potential shock in their hypothalamus would start releasing stress hormones, things like cortisol. And we know that over a period of time, these stress hormones will degrade our systems. They are not healthy for you over long periods of time. They're necessary in the short term, but over the long period of time, they will degrade your health. When the person was there with a loved one, either hand-holding or not, with a stranger or hand-holding or not, their brain was calmer. So what we can conclude is that alone, the world is more daunting. Now, there was a simpler study done, too, on friendship that involved placing the person at the base of a hill and asking them, how steep was that climb? So, invariably, the hill was not perceived to be as steep when they had a friend next to them. But they didn't even need to have that person there physically present with them. If the subject was asked just to think about a good friendship, and they were asked, how steep is that hill? And they thought about their friend, it was not so steep. So you see, again, alone, the world is more daunting. So now, the social rules don't change from actual to virtual. And friendship can even supersede our desires for self-preservation. There's a blurring of the defining line between self and other with relationships. And because of the power of perceived support, physical presence is not required. So we'll take action because of a threat to a friend is perceived as just as much of a threat to ourselves. Now remember Aristotle? One soul, two bodies. Virtual relationships are important. Recently, Susan Sarandon, she didn't need to defend her fashion choice against the comments by Piers Morgan because those with a relationship to her, those fans, they felt connected to her and were compelled to protect her. Now, let me tell you something else about your brain. Talk about neuroplasticity. So that means that your brain continues to develop. Now, here's my view of your brain. When you do something new or you're learning, you're operating in your prefrontal cortex. This is where we house our short-term memory. It's a lot of energy, and it burns off a ton of glucose. Like here, right? You're at the summit. You're meeting new people. You're learning new information. You're operating the entire day in your prefrontal cortex, and when you get back and you get into bed tonight, you will be physically beat. And you're thinking like, phew, how can this happen? I've been sitting on my butt all day. And yet I'm actually physically worn out. It's because you've been using the high energy portion of your brain. Now, when you repeat tasks, they actually create new neural pathways. This is neuroplasticity. Your brain continues to develop. It does not stagnate. So those tasks which were taking so much energy in your prefrontal cortex have now moved to new neural pathways in your basal ganglia. Tasks which once required a lot of attention, you don't even think about it anymore. It seems automatic. So, a great example I always give is about driving. So when you first start driving, you're operating in your prefrontal cortex and everything. You're thinking about it and it's intentional. And you've got to, where do I put the key in? Do I turn it this way or that way? And get it in gear and check the mirrors and don't turn the radio on. Don't talk to me. I need to focus. But then as you drive over a period of time, it becomes so routine. You don't need to think about which way to turn the key or how to engage the gears. And you drive. And you go, somewhere between the office and home, there's a 4-way stop. And I'm pretty sure I stopped, but I don't remember. Because it's just so ingrained. See, this happens when our tasks, operations become such a part of us. We don't even realize what we're doing anymore. See, a friend of mine's a plumber. He's owned his business for over 30 years, and he's good. And when Jeff finishes an install, he doesn't turn away and just dust off his hands and say, "That's remarkable." Well, I put a faucet in our kitchen at home, it didn't leak the first time. My wife, she thought that was pretty remarkable. Now, here's what we're all coming down to. Here's what this entire session is about and what I need for each of you to commit to. I want you to become a motivational listener. I have to admit, I stole this phrase from my wife. Someone asked her once what she does, and she said, I am a motivational listener. I'll tell you, that is an accurate description. You set aside time to come to the Social Media Summit, and there's a ton of great information that you'll take from here and use. And I need you to know what a tremendous responsibility you possess, both in your personal and professional relationships. People's health and well-being depend on you. I want you to practice to become a motivational listener. You see, hand-holding, physical touch is a way of bonding. The primates do this all the time, right? Picking the fleas off each other. And it's effective, but it's not efficient. Humans developed language, and language is our primary bonding tool. I want you to model, I want to model for you being a motivational listener. So I'm going to bring a volunteer up for this. And I'm going to go through and explain. It's going to take about 5 minutes for me to do that. It's hard to imagine that someone would not know the answer. Isn't it common knowledge? It's not. And I will put to you that you are indeed remarkable. Thank you. I'll let you go back down now. So last thing, what you do is important and unique. You have the ability to impact lives each day. You are remarkable. And when you are engaging a person as a motivational listener, actual or virtual, you are providing validation. Together, that hill is not so daunting. Their life, not irrelevant. I'm Scott Smith, and it's not about making money. Remember, it's not about making money. It's about living a life that makes a difference. Thank you.